Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Daily Dose. This week we're talking about big lies that we tell ourselves about the church. Today we're going to ask the question, are some sins bigger than others? Or are some sins worse than others? So maybe you've heard this analogy too. When I was growing up in the church, I heard this analogy that we all have sin and it's like a brick. And each sin that we commit, each hideous act or heinous act is a brick. And we stack them up one on top of the other. We have all of these sins in our lives and we look across at our neighbor and we see their sin piled high and this neighbor's sin is piled higher and we make judgments accordingly. But then there's God who looks at us all and is looking at us from above and just sees one brick. Now, I've heard that so many times and it used to provide so much comfort to me. But what we're going to talk about today is, are some sins worse than others? Well, the answer might be not as satisfying as you think, because the answer is yes and no. You see, in the Bible, and we know this too, God even tells us that some sins are worse than others. In the Old Testament, if we go way back, there's all these punishments for all these sins that people commit. So if people commit adultery, there's a punishment attached to it that God gives us. Or if people steal, there's a punishment attached to it. The penance that you pay for that sin or that crime. And some of it is really just. Maybe you've heard of some of these, like an eye for an eye. But go back and read some of those because some of them aren't what you think. But tonight, we don't have time to dive into all of those things. We don't have time to go through all of those laws. So what I want you to know is that, yes, there are some sins that are worse than others. And we know this. Some sins hurt worse than others. Some sins hurt our neighbors worse than others. Some sins that we do individually, and sometimes sins that we commit collectively with our neighbors together. And so we know, just as people, that yes, some sins are worse than others because they hurt our neighbor more than other sins, or they take us away from being in relationship with God more than others. We know this because it just makes sense, and we see it there in the Old Testament too. Well, I say also know that some sins are not worse than others, and I say that because this. All of us are sinners, and yet we are saints. Because of what Christ has done, our slates are wiped clean over and over and over again. And that's what Christ does for us. So he takes the sinful nature that we all have and makes us saints and sinners. And that grace and forgiveness we're given over and over and over again. We're given it when we go to confession or when we do corporate confession in the church. We're given it at the table when we do communion. We're given it through baptism. We're given it when we give it to our neighbors, just as Jesus has forgiven us. That grace that makes us saints, and we know we're also sinners. Saints and sinners. So are some sins worse than others? Well, yes and no. But thank God we have a God that loves us despite our sinful nature, makes us saints that we can live in the kingdom of God. Thanks for joining us today on the Daily Dose. We're so glad you could bop in. If you're watching on Facebook, go ahead and like and share this video. On YouTube, subscribe. And if you're watching on cable access, so glad you could join us tonight. Why don't you come again soon to see us on the Daily Dose? Have a good night.